And I'm just so delighted to welcome you all at home, or for some of you who are lucky enough to be outside in your back gardens, welcome, as well as, of course, our speakers. I hope that you and yours are all well in these extremely strange times that we live in at the moment, but that is the beauty of Zoom, and that we can get together under this format. So welcome. Firstly, just a little bit of housekeeping, and to remind everyone, if you haven't already, to mute yourselves. We have about an hour here together, and if you have any questions whatsoever at any point, then there is a chat box which should be at the middle of your screen, and so do feel free to add questions as we go along, and I'll make sure that we get them addressed before we sign off at the end of our session. For those of you who might have specific questions that you don't particularly want to share generally, then we'll make sure that you've got contact details for all of the relevant speakers so that you can follow up with them directly. And we're also, just a reminder to tell you that we are recording this today, and we'll be putting it up on our YouTube channel, and we'll send you all a link if you want to listen to it again, or if you in fact want to signpost this on to anybody. So just by way of introduction, a little bit about Brilliant Beginnings. We are a non-profit surrogacy agency that helps people achieve their family building plans with the amazing help of a surrogate. And we really want to ensure that the exceptional women who do go on to become surrogates are really well prepared and are matched with intended parents whose expectations and hopes match their own. We manage this on a one-to-one basis with the help of an experienced and dedicated team of client managers and surrogate managers, as well as many other surrogacy professionals, including lawyers, clinicians, psychologists, counselors, and other fertility specialists. But our goal is to help people to become parents, for women to become surrogates, and that any child that's born through surrogacy really knows that everyone involved came together in honesty and transparency, and most importantly, safely. So we thought that it would be really helpful for a lot of people who were sitting at home thinking about surrogacy to put this webinar together to help give some insight into some of the key aspects that you're going to need to think about, both in sort of the normal world outside of COVID, but also touching on some of the things to think about now that we've got this pandemic around us. So I'm really delighted that we'll be hearing from Sarah Templeman, who will cover the clinical perspective and talk through how things work in a typical surrogacy journey. We'll also hear from Natalie Gamble, who is my business partner, and will cover the legal side of surrogacy, as well as legal parentage. Following on from Natalie is Michael Tierney Gore, who is a fabulous dad with 2 children through surrogacy, and we really look forward to hearing about his personal experience and his day-to-day life at the moment, which will be very different to where it was pre-surrogacy. And finally, Tracy Sims, who is a surrogate and one of our lovely surrogate managers at Brilliant Beginnings. And she really has a vast amount of experience to talk through with us today. Each of the speakers will speak for about 10 minutes, and we'll certainly allow plenty of time for questions following that. So do please add in the questions to the chat box, which again is hopefully in the middle of your screen. So firstly, on to Sarah. Sarah Templeman is a nurse manager at the Herts and Essex Fertility Centre in Cheshire. She has over 20 years experience in nursing and has been instrumental in introducing and in fact running the Herts and Essex Egg Sharing and Surrogacy Programme. And really one of the really wonderful things I think about Sarah, and in fact the whole team at Herts and Essex, is the compassion and care that they show for all of their patients and clients. And the fact that Sarah and her team have one of the longest running programs here in the UK just really reflects that level of care. So I'll hand over to Sarah, and let's hear about how surrogacy works at the clinic.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. That was a lovely introduction, and thank you very much for asking me to join you today. It's very nice to be able to chat to multiple people all at once. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a clinic perspective, not just what happens at Herts and Essex, but what will be happening all over the country. I'll talk about how things work in normal times, and then I will go on a little bit to discuss how things are happening for us within this pandemic. So as a clinic, almost exclusively, we perform host surrogacy. And that's where the baby is genetically unrelated to the surrogate. IPs approach at all different stages of their journey, really. Sometimes I'm the very first port of call. I get people phoning, they haven't got a clue where to start. They see we do surrogacy and they start with me. So I tend to then point them in the way of lovely people like we have at Brilliant Beginnings to be able to find their surrogate. But I also start to talk to them about creating embryos, which is really what we advise most people to do in the first instance. Clinics are not able to source a surrogate for you, but we are able to help you create those embryos. So at our clinic, the cycles over the years are probably about 50% heterosexual couples and 50% same-sex couples. Obviously, the same-sex couples will be having surrogacy with the help of an egg donor. And probably about half and half of our heterosexual couples will also be using an egg donor. We do now have single people able to have surrogacy in the UK since January last year, but we haven't had so many inquiries from single people currently. As I say, we do generally advise people to create embryos in the first instance. It's good for several reasons. It means that when you do find a surrogate, you can proceed with treatment in your own time, and according to that surrogate's schedule, she doesn't have to tie in with anybody else for the cycle. She's dependent on her own dates. And also, it allows you to start doing something. Surrogacy is a very long and drawn out process, and I think for a long time people feel like you're not getting anywhere at all. So by actually doing a little bit towards that end goal, it's usually quite helpful mentally and psychologically to be able to get on with something. Some people come to me, fait accompli, embryos already created. Sometimes Brilliant Beginnings will actively refer couples to me who already have their embryos, so then we can arrange the transfer into the surrogate. Freezing techniques for embryos have improved vastly over the years, so I think people sometimes are wary about creating their embryos first, because it used to be, we used to do something called slow freezing for embryos, which drastically reduced the quality of those embryos, and frozen embryo transfer was not so successful. Nowadays we use a process called vitrification, and pretty much, certainly at our clinic, the results are almost the same, if not slightly better in some stats, for use of frozen embryos. So I'm very confident to advise people to create their embryos and freeze them in the first instance, and that it will still give the same chance of success as previously. So if you're wanting to sort of start the ball rolling with creating embryos, it's good to come along for a consultation to the clinic. For the intended parents, we will check sperm and eggs if we're going to use them, so we'll perform a semen analysis and check it's very important if somebody's intending to use their own eggs in a surrogacy arrangement that we've checked your ovarian reserve and that you have a good chance. It's very difficult if you go all the way through finding a surrogate and the egg quality is poor and it's not likely to be very successful. It's also something that we check out. Some people enter into surrogacy because they've had many previous miscarriages, such like. It's also important to try and determine if there's an egg factor involved in some of those miscarriages. And sometimes it's the case that people can go forward with egg donation on its own. So it's important to understand that we're doing the correct treatment as well. Gamete providers, so if you're providing your own eggs and sperm for the treatment, You do need to be screened as a donor. So there's quite extensive screening tests for some genetic tests and some infectious disease tests that need to be done for all donors in the country. And the only way the law will recognise surrogacy in this country is that you are a donor to your surrogate. So we have to screen you accordingly. Also, as you're seen as a donor, so sperm being used for donation within this country has to be quarantined for 3 months. So we can either quarantine sperm or sperm as part of the embryos that have been created, but there needs to be a quarantine period of 3 months whereby we've performed screening tests at the beginning of the treatment before freezing, and then we perform it again at least 3 months afterwards to check it's clear. Every couple going through treatment, or every team going through treatment, requires counselling in the UK. That counselling is a session for intended parents. There is a session for the surrogate and her partner if she has one. And then there's a team session as well. So the counsellors will want to see that you're an established team before you're going into a surrogacy arrangement. And then the clinics will want you to have had legal advice and have a signed agreement as part of your treatment. So that's sort of, in a little short spin, the sort of paths through surrogacy. Some people do come along and have a fresh cycle. That is also possible. You don't have to freeze your embryo, so it is possible to quarantine the sperm for 3 months. And then we coordinate the cycles of either the intended mother or the egg donor with the surrogate, and we transfer those embryos created using the frozen quarantine sperm into the surrogate. And so people kind of want to know what they can do at the moment, and I have had loads and loads of inquiries. Everybody's very busy doing their research during this period, so I think it's good. I think we're going to get some very well informed people at the end of this pandemic. So what can you do? Inquire, ask questions. Email me, ask me anything you want to know. The very best surrogacy cycles and most successful teams are those that are well researched and know your stuff. That's what I always say. You do need to know what you're doing with a surrogacy cycle, and you don't want any surprises at the end as you go along the way. So it's important to do your homework to find, have a look at how you might like to source your surrogate, whether it's through an agency, whether you have somebody you know, all of those things. Look at the legal parameters that are involved in that. Speak to a few different clinics. It's a little bit more difficult at the moment because normally we'd invite you along for an open evening, show you our clinic, all of those kind of things. Those sort of things are not happening at the moment, although we do hope to do some online open evenings. But it is possible to get a feel of the clinic by just speaking to the staff and everything else, and yeah, feel free to pick my brain, as it were. If you can come along for a consultation, so as potential intended parents, there's some things we can tick off. So you can have a consultation appointment which will give you that information about the quality of eggs and sperm, so you're going into the treatment with eyes open. You can freeze your sperm if necessary. If you're going to require an egg donor provided by the clinic, at our clinic we currently have about a 3 to 4 month wait for an egg donor, so it's a really good idea to get your name on that list and get the ball rolling from that point of view. But yeah, just do your homework, have a little look around. There's lots of groups and things you can join online for information, although be wary of them. But yeah, just do your homework and sort of make your plan, as it were. For surrogates, screening wise, so our sort of clinic requirements to be a surrogate, so we would like our surrogates to be under 45 years of age. We want them to have had a child and have a good obstetric history, so good pregnancies, low risk deliveries, but not too many deliveries. Also, it can be dangerous for women to have too many deliveries, so we would hesitate at someone who'd had more than 4 deliveries previously. because there can be a higher risk of postpartum hemorrhage and things after that. So that is one of the things we take into account. We like a surrogate to have a BMI under 35 and be in good general health, not generally taking any regular medication or anything. Our surrogates can be married, cohabiting or single. All of that is fine, but they will need to understand that if they have a partner or a husband, they will need to be part of the journey. So we would need them to see them in clinic, to sign some forms, or remotely, as it is at the moment. And we would need them to be part of the counselling process. So we need to ensure that that surrogate is safe within that cycle and that her family are all aware of the legal implications of that cycle. And as I said, counselling, so there will be an individual session for the surrogate, as well as a group session with the intended parents once you've formed your team. Egg donation, if you need a donor via us, so it's possible some people have a known donor that they like to bring along. That happens quite often, but if you wish to have an anonymous donor sourced via the clinic, there is no change in current legislation with the pandemic. There are no extra screening tests for donors. It has been said, so the HFEA have laid down that every woman having an egg collection in the UK has to be tested for COVID-19 48 hours prior to egg collection, and the same will happen with your egg donor. What will happen is that there's triage questions for everybody coming into the clinic that test the symptoms. So if anybody is found to be symptomatic, their treatment would be stopped. So there is always that to bear in mind, but generally nothing's changed. I have yet to have any donors who've sort of said they don't want to go ahead at the moment. I'm not sure whether that will happen or not. So, and I've certainly still had inquiries. So I'm not anticipating the availability of donors to change dramatically as it stands. There is, importantly, no evidence currently, or likely to be, I don't think, that COVID-19 is transmitted via eggs or sperm. In fact, eggs and sperm don't have the right receptors for the virus, so it's very unlikely that there'll be any problem, although I think there have been a few papers with regards to seminal fluid, so that it is very unlikely that would give you increased risk by receiving a donor egg. So sort of to wrap up, how has COVID-19 changed everything? Well, essentially it's changed nothing, but my God, it's changed everything for us as a clinic. So all of the UK clinics were shut. So we started to cancel patients earlier. We sort of saw it earlier. So we were cancelling patients, I think, from the 13th of March, so a little bit before lockdown. Clinics were able to reapply for their licenses for treatment from last Monday, the 11th of May. And every clinic would have had to prove that they had processes and procedures in place to keep patients safe in order to regain that license. So we regained our license last Tuesday, and subsequently have been trying to sort of work out how it's all going to work. So we put in place parameters so to keep everybody safe, but it's very difficult. We've got a big waiting list of patients, and things you need to consider perhaps is that all clinics will probably have waiting lists for treatment. So we cancelled probably about 150 planned cycles, some of them during, some of them after. So every clinic will have the same situation. So patience will be something that will be a virtue, and our surrogacy teams tend to be blessed with it, fortunately, because they've had to be used to it. But there will be a waiting list for consultation, and from consultation there will then be a waiting list for treatment, but we will do our very best. It is more difficult for the clinics because we have to social distance both patients and staff. So for example, we're actually going to open the clinic from 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock, 7 in the morning till 9 at night, in order for the staff to be able to work in 2 teams. But you'd think that would give us lots more appointments, but it still gives us much less appointment time, because for every appointment, every patient that comes into the clinic, one, we're all in PPE. We have to clean down thoroughly in between each patient, such things like that. So people do need to bear with us, but essentially everything's normal. It will just take a little bit longer. You do need to bear in mind that you won't all be able to attend the clinic together. So I've always really enjoyed my surrogacy work. I like the teams to all come in together for appointments. I really, really enjoy that, and that is no longer going to be able to happen. So essentially, we plan to be doing consultations remotely, treatment information appointments, which is the bit when you see me usually, we're going to do remotely, and the surrogate will be required to attend scans and even for her transfer alone without her partner. So that is a big undertaking for surrogates going into things at this time, and it's really important that they understand that we have to work in that way. We won't be inviting people into our waiting room for a nice cup of tea and hot chocolate and everything and a nice chat. The patients will be outside, and we will call them through to the room that they're going to be seen in when the time comes, because obviously there are some things we can't do outside. So it will be very, very different for us and for the patients. But we will still be there. We will still be offering treatment. I think we'll get more used to it as time goes on. So I would suggest that we will get better at it, and hopefully it may not be so strict for all the time. There was one more thing I wanted to say. Yeah, that you may get, as I said, donors not wishing to proceed, and you may, have the risk of a cancelled cycle. And it's also important that you bear in mind beyond it, so that you're going to be having to go, if you're pregnant, you're going to be going to hospital appointments alone throughout your pregnancy. It's likely, because I have a feeling this is around for a while. And yeah, just the risks of it and the unknowns. There are unknowns. We don't know 100%. It doesn't appear that babies are affected by COVID-19, but we can't guarantee it at the moment. It's too new. We can't guarantee that you're not at higher risk of miscarriage. We can't guarantee that it won't give you premature labour, and we also can't guarantee that if somebody contracts COVID-19 whilst pregnant, that it won't affect them more seriously. So yeah, it's not very nice to end on doom and gloom, but I think that's my message. But my message is we are still here. Think about it carefully, but whether it's the right time for you to have treatment, but we are certainly, providing it. I think that's my...
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, and I do think it's, it is really great news that you are opening up, and that although it might be a wee bit slower and a wee bit different, actually the fact that it's going ahead is really the hope and the light at the end of all of this. So, and yeah, I'm sure we will get used to it. So yeah. And I think the whole team at Herts and Essex, I think, the way you approach things is always just so warm and caring, so you won't lose that either. So brilliant.
I hope we can carry that on. I hope the barriers aren't too much.
We will. We have had a few questions come through on the chat box, but I will pick those up right at the end just to reassure you. I've been trying to private message everyone just to say we will get to it, so bear with us. There's a whole range of questions, some for you, Sarah, some for other parts, so we'll get to those. I'm really pleased to invite Natalie now to come and speak. So Natalie Gamble is so well known in surrogacy and the fertility world, both here in the UK as well as internationally. And obviously she's my business partner, so I'm very pleased to see her, because we don't see each other very often face to face these days. To be honest, there's nothing that Natalie doesn't know about surrogacy in relation to, the complexities around surrogacy, as well as what is just normal. Indeed, how the law has unraveled over the last few decades to reflect some of the more newer practicalities of surrogacy. And really the main reason that there isn't much she doesn't know is because between her and the team at NGA Law, they have been pretty much involved in all of it, all of those changes. Natalie continues to campaign and champion for alternative families, and I'm going to hand over to her to hear about how the law is working, both in a normalized situation, but all as well as in terms of the strange times.
Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. And I miss you too. So it's nice to be together in this way, at least. So what I was going to do is just spend about 10 minutes just giving a real overview of how the law works in relation to surrogacy. And I will kind of touch on how it's being affected by the situation at the moment, but also kind of talk through how it works in normal times as well. And for those of you who are newer to the legal issues around surrogacy in the UK, the surrogacy is legal here. It's certainly permitted and it happens and it can all be kind of properly legally recognised, but it is a little bit backwards. So the law was written more than 35 years ago, and essentially the legal process for unravelling surrogacy happens at the end of the process. So rather than everybody going into an agreement that would be recognised at the beginning, you have to wait until the baby is born in order to go through a process to make the right people the legal parents. So this is what I mean about it being backwards. But I think one of the really important things to know about surrogacy law is that doesn't mean that it is any less important to do the things that need to be done at the beginning. So putting things in writing is very important because it gives everybody in a surrogacy team clarity about their expectations and about what will happen. So even though a written agreement in the UK doesn't carry any legal recognition, it's still a very important document. And for parents and surrogates who are working through Brilliant Beginnings, the team will spend a lot of time working with you through that agreement to make sure that that's done really thoroughly. Secondly, it's really important to have legal advice at the beginning of the process. If there is some issue or some pitfall that you're not aware of, you don't want to be finding out after your baby's born that there might be a problem with becoming legal parents. So it's really important to be clear and also to have a good sense of what the path ahead looks like. So I'm going to talk you through kind of what the path is like in terms of the legal side of surrogacy. So essentially, because it all happens after the event, the first step at which you're dealing with the law is when you come to register the birth when the baby's born. And the law in the UK says that the surrogate, the woman who gives birth, is the legal mother of the child when at that birth. So regardless of whether you are a gestational surrogate, you're carrying a child who's not biologically yours, obviously you don't intend to be a parent, you will still have that responsibility of being the legal mother. Now, if you're married as a surrogate, then your husband or your wife will be the other legal parent. So when you go and register the birth, it's you and your partner who are recorded on the birth certificate rather than the intended parents. Now, if as a surrogate you're not married, then one of the intended parents can go on the birth certificate with you immediately. So in terms of birth registration, that part of it is very much the surrogate's responsibility. But of course, commonly in normal times, surrogacy teams will all go and register the birth together, and it's perfectly fine to register the birth with the intended parents' surnames. Now, at the moment, because of the pandemic restrictions, birth registrations have been completely put on hold. So it's not currently possible to register a birth. The registrar office keeps saying they're going to reopen and they will be booking appointments, but so far we're not kind of seeing that happening. So there is a delay with that. And I imagine that's because it's quite a difficult process to do in a remote way, in a way that's kind of reliable for the register. So for the moment, it's difficult to get official birth certificates, but that's not the end of the world. So what we're advising parents to do is get the hospital birth confirmation records instead, because we can use those hospital records in lieu of the birth certificate in order to start the process of making them the legal parents. So after the birth registration, or at the moment without a birth registration, the next step in the legal process is then to begin the court application for a parental order. And a parental order is an order that's made by the family court, specifically designed for surrogacy cases. And what it does is it reassigns parenthood from the surrogate and her spouse to the intended parents. So it kind of puts that wrapper around what everybody intends and makes the intended parents the legal parents, and then triggers the reissue of the birth certificate. So the original birth certificate, which records the surrogate, is sealed away, and the General Register Office will issue the child with a new birth certificate, which records the intended parents. So it's a really important process in terms of sort of resolving everything. And for surrogates, obviously, it gives you that legal security that you're no longer responsible. And for intended parents, obviously, it makes you your child's legal parents. So the application process, as I've said, you can start the process by sending your application form into the court. The family court have been absolutely amazing with dealing with the lockdown restrictions. So they really led the way among the different kind of divisions of the court system here with making sure that everything could be done remotely. So almost kind of the day after lockdown was announced, we had an immediate shift over to court hearings happening by telephone and by Skype, by applications being able to be issued by email, and you know they have been absolutely fantastic. And I was in a remote court hearing this morning on Skype and chatting with the judge's clerk, and she was saying that they're now being asked to train the other courts around the UK about how to do it. So thankfully the whole kind of parental order process is not being massively held up at the moment by the pandemic. So you can email your application into the court to start the process. As I've said, you can even do it without the birth certificate. The court will then log your application in the system, and they will issue some forms for the surrogate and her partner to sign. The key bits of the process from there are about, there's kind of 3 elements to it. So first of all, the intended parents will have to give some evidence in order to satisfy the court that they meet all the criteria. And that's usually in the form of a written statement. So the court will ask you as the intended parents to file a statement that explains the surrogacy story and the background, but most importantly, make sure that you meet all the criteria. So I'm not going to go through all those criteria in detail, but the main issues, just to flag up the ones that are the kind of meat of the application, if you like. So you need to show which kind of relationship status category you fall into. So parents can apply as a couple, either if they're married or living together, or they can now apply as single parents as well, following a law change last year. So you know, that's the relationship status. You have to show a biological connection. If you're applying as a couple, you only need a biological connection with one of you. If you're a single parent, then you need to be the biological parent. You also have to show domicile, and domicile is about, you know, making sure that you've got sufficient connection with the UK. So if you've come from somewhere originally other than the UK and you've settled here, or if you're British and you're living somewhere else, then those are the situations where you may want to get some advice about how you would satisfy the court on domicile. And then lastly, the issue around expenses, which is always the one that people get very tied up around. So the court has to be satisfied either that you've paid no more than reasonable expenses to the surrogate, or they have to agree to authorise the payment. So you can see that even the way the law is written is quite unclear. There is that flexibility for the court to be able to authorise payments. And in practice in UK surrogacy cases, there are a range of different approaches to expenses. So some parents pay actual kind of out-of-pocket expenses as they're incurred, and they can, in their statement to the court, give a list of all those expenses. But the majority tend to agree a figure at the outset with the surrogate, which, you know, may be a very broad brush, general, reasonable figure. And usually we see that figure being somewhere in the bracket of £12,000 to £20,000. And the court is quite relaxed about how that payment is justified. So quite often in statements, people will just say that's the figure that was agreed, and the court seems quite happy with that. So the court will be looking at whether you meet all of those criteria. They will also be looking at the welfare side of things. So they'll want to know a bit about the relationship between the parents and the surrogate, about how the child is doing, and just those kind of wider pictures to give them an idea of, you know, what this child's world looks like. So all of those issues as intended parents, you'll need to cover in your written statement. The second part of the process that's really important is the CAFCAS role. So CAFCAS is the Child and Family Court Advisory and Support Service. So essentially social workers who do an investigation job for the family court judges. So the CAFCAS officer will arrange to go and see the surrogate and her spouse if she's married. And the main purpose of their visit is to confirm that the surrogate consents to the parental order. The CAFCAS officer will then also go and see the intended parents at home, see them with the baby, and make sure that, you know, the criteria are met and that the child's welfare is protected. And the CAFCAS officer will then file a written report. Now, at the moment, CAFCAS are doing their home visits by Skype and Zoom and FaceTime. So all of this is kind of happening. I suspect this is one part of the process that will go back to being an in-person thing once that's possible. But at the moment, it's not holding things up that it can't be done that way. And then the final part of the process that's really important is the court hearing. So once all of that has been done, there will be a court hearing where you'll be invited to attend. The intended parents will go with the baby. The surrogate is obviously very welcome to go as well, although that's not required if you don't want to. And the hearing is often very much a kind of celebration hearing. You know, we sometimes go along and represent parents, but often find that the magistrates are sort of cooing over the baby and sharing teddy bears much more than talking about the law. So they're really nice events and a nice celebration of the end of a very long journey. And once the court has made that order, then they will send a copy to the register office, which will arrange to issue the child's new birth certificate. So all of this process seems to be possible during the current pandemic. We're not quite sure really in terms of the impact on timeframes. You would kind of assume that there would be delay. Actually, what we're seeing is some positive impact in terms of timeframes. So it seems when we email applications into the court, they get issued and turned around much more quickly than when we post them. And it seems that CAFCAS can also arrange home visits a bit more quickly because I guess they're not travelling to so many places, so they can fit more in. So in some ways, there's some positive impact. But you know, there may be delays in other areas as well, with kind of fewer court staff and fewer people at the register offices and so on. So just that's very broadly kind of the way that the law is working, and it is still running. So we can kind of help to make sure that we deal with this final step of, you know, not just the baby being born, but also making sure that the baby's secure in the right legal family. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. We have had a few questions, as you would expect, so we'll pick those up at the end. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So next, I'm really just so delighted to introduce you to Michael Tierney Gore, who I mentioned at the beginning has two beautiful children through surrogacy, and his first son was born with the help of Brilliant Beginnings' very first surrogate. He's got an enormous amount of personal experience, having gone through this twice with the help of the same surrogate. So I'm not going to say any more than that and hand over to you, Michael.
Hi, thanks, Helen. So I suppose I'd like to start off by saying that the key thing is obviously the relationship between the intended parents and the surrogate. The personal relationship between them is everything, because in order to do surrogacy, you need a very, very high degree of trust. And in an emotionally sensitive setting, such as a birth, that trust comes from a connection as people. So when we were introduced to our surrogate Anna by Brilliant Beginnings back in quite a long time ago now, in January 14, we immediately connected with Anna as people who just got on with each other. And that was basically because the Brilliant Beginnings team had invested quite a lot of energy in trying to match us. You know, they'd met us, they'd met Anna, and in line with a kind of a dating agency, they realized that these people would get on. So that level of personal connection was able to carry us through the first surrogacy journey, which led to the birth of our first son, Rupert, in April 2015, and then 2 3/4 years later to our second son, Felix. Having a relationship with a surrogate now is second nature to us. Anna is very much a part of our lives as a friend, as a special friend with whom we have a lot of history. But for the first few weeks when we didn't know each other, although there was that personal connection as people who get on with each other, that there is still a lot of kind of settling down into this role, kind of gently exploring matters, gently getting to know each other and working out how on a practical level we're going to you're going to deal with the potential challenges that that you'll have to face. We we unfortunately didn't have embryos ready when we met Anna. We had set the ball rolling with the clinic, but we didn't have embryos. And looking back upon it now, it's a shame, because we wasted a few months waiting for the egg donor from the fertility clinic that we used. Anna did offer us her, after about 3 months of knowing each other and becoming, you know, and trusting each other, but waiting for the anonymous egg donors, for the anonymous eggs from the donor, she volunteered her own eggs. But we waited that, and we'd already waited quite a long time, and we just felt that going forward we'd prefer to have not to have that additional emotional complication of using Anna's eggs. So we waited a few more weeks and we got the eggs, and I'm delighted to say that our journey was completely without hitch. The first embryo that was implanted into Anna was successful on both occasions, both for the first child and the second child. So we only had to go through that process once in relation to each birth. There were no complications during pregnancy, although towards the end of the second pregnancy in particular, Anna was suffering from kind of normal pregnancy issues and was exceptionally tired all the time. And once the children were born, there were no real complications, despite the clunky nature of the legal system. I think you have to be quite unlucky for the legal system to present any real obstacles. So long as the child is healthy and you don't have a major fallout with your surrogate, which is exceptionally unlikely to happen if you've been matched as expertly as you will be through Brilliant Beginnings. The legal process sounds much scarier than it actually is. I know that my own mum had many sleepless nights worrying about whether Anna was going to sign the documents, but after having formed that really great connection with Anna, my partner and I, Jerome and I, knew that there was no way it could end in any way other than very happily. Anna, we attended, so Jerome and I attended every single appointment throughout the first pregnancy. It was more difficult to attend all the appointments during the second pregnancy because we had a 2-year-old child, and also Anna lives 90 miles away from us, but we went to the majority of them for the second pregnancy as well. Anna herself didn't think that was necessary. She was quite happy to go to the midwife appointments on her own, but we thought it was important for our connection with the pregnancy and with the children in her womb that we wanted to go and feel a part of it, and also to support Anna. Once you get to know, once the intended parents meet the surrogates and form this relationship, obviously each team will set its own, will have its own expectations, its own needs as to the level of emotional and practical contact that you have. What worked for us was a high degree of contact. We went to all these appointments, but I know that doesn't always happen because people are busy, people are private, people, for whatever reason, you have to do what suits you. But for us, it suited us to go to all these appointments. After Rupert was born, the practicalities, so once all the practicalities of Rupert's parental order had been sorted out, we just settled into a really nice natural friendship where we had this history together, but we were just hanging out as friends. We went to many barbecues in Bournemouth at Anna's house, and then a couple of years later we had the chat and we decided to start it again for Felix. Now, 6 years after we first met Anna and her partner and now her children, we remain very good friends, and it's really great and we see them twice, 3 times a year. They do live 90, 100 miles away, and it's quite an arduous, well, it's a big day trip to go and see them. So we see them twice, 3 times a year, and and we Skype quite a lot. And it's really nice for our children to see Anna and her family. And we have never shied away from explaining exactly who Anna and her family are and what role they played in the creation of our family. It's interesting. I know everyone who's involved, who's watching today, is thinking about getting involved in surrogacy, and at the moment, the roles are, I'm a potential surrogate. I'm an intended parent. 6 years on from having met Anna, we've kind of moved away from that now, and we're just friends who share a very special history. And we'll always be, we'll always be exceptionally grateful to Anna and all of her family. I think that I don't know if there are any specific things I should be mentioning here, Helen.
That's perfect. I think we've got a few questions that we might loop you back into at the end. I think the thing that I just wanted to kind of say in terms of when I first, when we spoke to Anna shortly after she'd had Rupert and the first baby, she was like, you know what, that was just such a great experience, and I really love Michael and the family and everything, but I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
And then very speedily she was like, well, I fell in love with these guys, and I fell in love with the fact that I was helping them have a family, and it's not finished yet. So and I think what you were saying right at the beginning about that relationship and that foundation being so important.
I think, given that the legal framework is clunky, to say the least, and there's no guarantee that that even one of the intended parents will be on the birth certificate, trust really is everything, because you are trusting them to do the right thing. And I've over the years I've met many people who've been on a surrogacy journey, and I've not heard of anyone that has had anything other than a brilliant experience.
Good. Thank you, Michael. Well, we'll look back to you with some of the questions that are coming through. And finally, by no means least, none of this would be possible without the extraordinary help of the exceptional women like Tracy, who commit to help make families possible. As I said before, Tracy joined Brilliant Beginnings as a surrogate manager last year, and her big role is to help more women become surrogates. And she really does an extraordinarily exceptional job. Prior to this, she was one of our brilliant surrogates and helped bring a beautiful little girl into the world. And she's also donated her eggs, so she's got more strings to her bow than most of us. She really is a goddess, and so I'm going to hand over to Tracy.
Thank you, Helen. Well, I started my journey by doing 2 rounds of egg donation, which resulted in the birth of a baby boy. It was actually a fertility clinic where I completed the egg donation that initially spoke to me about becoming a surrogate to start with. When they first mentioned it, I was in the process of doing my egg donation, so I just wanted to concentrate on that at the time. When they mentioned it for the second time, I was coming to the end of the second donation, knowing that I was too old to do that again. So they gave me some information to look over in a bit more detail, and realised it was more of a case of why wouldn't I do it as opposed to why would I? And so started to look into it further. Mainly online, online forums, Facebook groups. I don't think it ever crossed my mind to do an independent journey. It was always going to be an agency for me. I like having the guidance and the support on hand through each step. I looked into the 3 different agencies available in the UK and found the biggest difference for me between them was how they all matched their surrogates to their IPs differently. Big social events meetups weren't really our thing. We wanted more of a personal experience. I originally thought having the choice of deciding who I worked with would be the better option, but I realised it would be quite hard to decide which one person deserves a family over another. So we decided to come to Brilliant Beginnings, as they do the matching themselves and making sure everyone's aligned on the key issues for the pregnancy, the birth, and then beyond, and make sure we're all basically on the same page, so to speak. So I've done this process with Brilliant Beginnings, so I've been matched twice, and I've made some really good lifelong friends through it. My first couple were amazing. We went through 4 rounds of embryo transfers before each of them, unfortunately, were a negative result. They had decided that they'd used all their embryos, and this was after a long IVF journey themselves prior to coming to surrogacy. So they wanted to call things a day there and not go any further. And we're still really good friends now and keep in contact and stuff. So we made a decision to get rematched, and Brilliant Beginnings matched us with our second couple. And with my second couple, the first transfer worked first time, and I got pregnant straight away. So I gave birth to their daughter in February 2018. And I think I look at the surrogate baby now as that I had for them almost in the same light as my nieces and nephews. I love her to bits, but we're not in contact every day. We have family meetups as and when we can, and we've become really good friends from it. So through the pregnancy, intended mother, she came to all of my midwife appointments, and then all 4 of us went to the scans together. We also had a 4D scan, which we had privately, which we invited her parents to, so the baby's grandparents. They came along as well, so it's really good to be able to involve them in a part of it as well. Through the pregnancy, we used predominantly WhatsApp groups. We had a group for the 4 of us, so that everyone was involved in conversations and that we were having. We also had a girls only chat for the more private stuff that the guys didn't really need to be involved in. So that worked really well for us. And then nearer the birth, they rented a cottage to stay in nearby where I live. And so they were down here for the birth, and then they stayed in there for a few days afterwards as well. So the girls got to see the baby and everything before they went home. I'd say the biggest thing for me, again, exactly what Michael said, is trust, really, building a trust between you all. They've got to have a good level of trust with you to be able to look after the baby and carry the baby through the pregnancy. And then you've got to have the trust in them to, look after the baby going forward. So yeah, definitely, like any relationship, trust is the sort of good basis for that. The feeling I get every time I see her, I can't describe. Seeing them growing as a family is very special to me. I have now joined Brilliant Beginnings, or Brilliant Beginnings team as surrogate manager, and helping other ladies go through the screening process to become surrogates themselves is very exciting. The screening process is quite in depth. I'm not going to lie. We ask a lot of questions, some of which are very personal, but we get you to think about a lot of hypothetical scenarios and situations that you may not have even considered, but it's just to get you prepared as prepared as we possibly can in readiness for what's ahead. That being said, would I recommend it? Totally. I'm contactable through the website. We've also got a Facebook page, the support and information for surrogates. So if anyone wants to join that, if they're considering being a surrogate, then please join that. And yeah, we have a lot of interactions on there. But more than happy to chat to anyone as well. So do feel free to get in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tracy. Yeah, I know it's hard to kind of wrap everything up in 10 minutes. So, you know, we've got a few questions. And that brings us to the end of the formal part. There is a whole bunch of questions which I've tried to group together, and actually it makes sense, Tracy, if we can just pick up one of the questions that's come in around the effect of the pandemic on surrogates, and whether there has been a drop in the number of women potentially thinking of becoming surrogates, and have you perceived any unwillingness to, you know, go to the clinic or be in hospitals or anything like that?
No. We've actually, since I've started, we've seen an increase of the numbers of inquiries we've got coming through. I think I've had a bit more time to sort of, you know, to be more interactive on Facebook and things like that. Last month, April, we hit the highest number of surrogate inquiries we've had ever. So no, it's not affecting the inquiry side of things at all, which is really good, really positive. I think maybe in the current situation, people have got more time on their hands to sort of, you know, if they've been trying, you know, wanting time to actually think about things, think things through, get the information and stuff. I think they're using that as a real positive step to be able to do the research that they need to do, ask all the questions they want to ask, and you know, to have that time to be able to look at it in more detail. So no, I think it's, from that side of things, it's definitely been, you know, really helpful for them.
Yeah, great. And I guess the other thing, you know, which has put things on a stop is the fact that clinics weren't able to open their doors. And I think, you know, what we've heard in terms of what Herts and Essex are doing to protect everyone, you know, and move things maybe slowly forward, but I think you know, there's huge reassurance that both the HFEA and the clinics, once their doors are open, you know, more widely, that they're going to be taking the care and attention that they need to make everyone feel safe. So yeah, and as I think Sarah, you picked up earlier as well, that you've got a bit of a backlog to catch up with anyway, so it doesn't feel like anybody's been put off from moving forward. It's just been a bit slower and a bit of a hurdle.
No, and certainly I'm providing all of the cycles that we've got waiting with the information moving forward, and all of those risk factors, and to bear in mind what it will be like, and nobody's been put off at all. All the surrogates are still on board. So
great. Okay, thank you.
We've also put in place of doing like home visits that would normally be done in like face to face. We'd go out and visit them. We've been doing via Zoom calls or Skype calls, with the view that we will get round to doing them in person later on when we're able to. But just so that we can still carry on doing the things that we were doing as we would normally do, so we can still match people and get teams put together so that they can start their getting to know period virtually while we're in this situation, which recently we have made some good matches, and they're all excited to get, you know, talking and stuff, even if it is virtually at the moment. So
brilliant, thank you. There's another question that actually almost straddles both Tracy, you and Sarah, is in relation to C-sections. And you know, if a surrogate has had C-sections for her own children, would that be a no for becoming a surrogate from either, you know, a screening part of the screening, or in fact a clinical decision? Tracy, do you want to?
It's not necessarily a no. No, we will definitely be looking at getting your doctors notes and things and get their advice on what they advise. I mean, they may advise another C-section, so that is definitely taken into consideration. But it's more of a on case by case, so we'd look into other things first as well. It wouldn't be something that would automatically rule you out, no.
And
from our point of view, yeah, an individual basis really, depending on how many C-sections you've had, how many children you've had.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, can we loop back to you now, Sarah? We've got a few kind of clinical perspective questions. I'm hoping I'll capture all of them, but at the end I'll go right back to the beginning just to make sure. I thought better to cluster. So then in terms of semen tests, if someone has had a semen test done at or a sperm test done at another clinic within the last 12 months, and is looking to presumably create embryos at, say, your clinic or a different clinic, is there a need for another one, or can that first one be relied on?
So at our clinic, we do include a semen analysis in the cost of our initial consultation. We actually look at some different parameters. So I think we're the only clinic that include routinely, we look at the maturity of the sperm within the sample. So we perform something called a HbA analysis, which has been quite important moving forward. So we look a little bit closer at the sperm. So we would insist that everybody does produce a sample at the clinic.
Okay, and that presumably those are different protocols for different clinics.
Yeah, I would say it would be different protocols for different clinics, but I would imagine that most clinics would want to do the sample themselves, I would imagine.
And then in terms of embryo creation, roughly how long would that take?
The cycle. So the cycle, it's an IVF cycle. So it will take usually a month from beginning to end, really. I mean, it slightly depends on what protocols we use. We usually would use a protocol whereby you're stimulating for 2 weeks and then transfer. So between 3 and 4 weeks usually.
Wonderful. Okay. And then this is a question around egg donors and where you find egg donors. Obviously, you guys have an egg share program. And is there any other way of finding an egg donor that you're aware of? I can talk about our experience as well.
I mean, we do have altruistic donors approach us as well. So the majority of our donors are egg sharing donors, but we do also have some altruistic donors come to our clinic. So they approach us basically.
Yeah. And I think that's what we see typically with most clinics, you know, that there are altruistic donors. Some clinics will have egg share programs and have egg banks, others will not. And then there's also organizations like Altrui that will help find egg donors and then bring them to the clinic. So hopefully that answers that question. And there's another question that's just come in around cost of embryo creation. So sperm and egg collection included. Do you have a rough idea of that?
So yeah, package wise, including your donor costs would usually be somewhere around £12,000 with everything. I think the list price is about 11, but by the time you've added in cost of consultations and things, you'll be looking at about £12,000.
And then you would have, so you've got the embryo creation. Is that just for embryo creation, or is that for?
No, sorry, that's for the whole lot. So we do a price list whereby you'll pay. So you pay for what you've had at the time. So you would pay for the creation and the freezing, which I think is £8 something, I think, and then you pay the surrogate part at the time that you have that part.
So it's a 12,000.
Oh yeah. So there's
broken down as you reach each stage.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. Okay. I think that is broadly all of the, I know there's been questions around, oh, here's another question that's probably going to be for me to answer. Is the embryo creation stage separate from or happen before engaging Brilliant Beginnings? If I'm honest, you know, I think if somebody came to us without embryos, what we would suggest, and we were able to take them on as intended parents, we would most certainly be suggesting that people go and create embryos. And you know, while they're waiting for a surrogate, or to wait to be matched with a surrogate. At the same time, there are some people who do get matched quite quickly, and as we heard from Michael, you know, that you know, having creating the embryos post match can also happen, but that we're becoming, you know, it's more and more that people will go ahead and create embryos before they're actually matched. And certainly for our intended parents who we are taking on, and we would suggest that they create embryos, you know, as soon as they can. And part of that is because the embryo creation process can take a little bit of time, and we also know that you know, surrogates, once they're matched, they've been through a fairly onerous screening process, and so they want to move on as quickly as possible. But it's a little bit individual as well. Okay. And I've just seen a question around that yes, we're, in terms of us taking on new applications for intended parents, you know, we've had to close our books. And part of that is, while we're focusing on screening the surrogates that are coming through, and we want to make sure that actually that we're able to match people in a reasonable amount of time, but still looking after the surrogates that were coming through. And it's really difficult for us to, you know, kind of make an assessment as to when we're able to open them up again. And that is in the main because, you know, we don't have any control over the surrogates, the timelines that they're going to take to get through the various stages. With Tracy on board, you know, that does happen a little bit more quickly than it did in the past. But at the same time, it still comes down to the number of not just inquiries, but the number of women that actually would pass through that process. So unfortunately, we can't predict. And what I would suggest is that, you know, just keep an eye on the website every couple of weeks or so. I mean, what we don't do is, you know, open our books for 24 hours and then close them again. We're going to give people enough time to get in touch and work out whether this is something they want to do, and you know, for us to talk through whether we're going to be able to help. So yeah, keep an eye on the website. And I'll ask Stephen when he sends through his the contact details for everybody to send in a link to where you can find that information on our website. Okay, there's some questions around costs. Okay, so average time, this was another question right at the beginning. What is the average time to find the right surrogate in the UK and elsewhere? And there's another question around how long typically does it take to get matched? And it's probably going to be most sensible if I answer that. It is really difficult to pin down an average timeline. You know, in an ideal world, it would be within a year in the UK, but actually it's about, you know, as Michael said, it's a bit like dating in that you just don't know who you're going to, you know, have coming through. So, and different surrogates have got different criteria, and different intended parents have got different criteria. So marrying that up together when there is a real shortage of surrogates here is really, really tricky. We would love, and I know Natalie, and my dreams is to be able to say, you know what, we can match in 3 months, but that's not possible. You know, we've been looking at our average match time since we started, and they have significantly come down. You know, I think 6-7 years ago we were looking at roughly 2 to 3 years. What we're now looking at is you know, in a year would be amazing, and we have done matches that, you know, has been a few months. So sometimes it can be really fast if the timing is right and you know, the right surrogate comes through at the right time. Internationally, of course, it's hugely varied. You know, in the States you can be matched very, very quickly, and there's a lot of predictability about it. Canada is probably the same as the UK. Places like the Ukraine and Georgia, you know, outside of COVID, it's very fast. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of a picture on that. Okay. Cost of process, including egg donation. And then there's a question, Natalie, about Ukraine as well. Cost of process, I mean, we say a sensible budget here in the UK is between 50 and 60,000 pounds. Again, depending on your personal circumstances, it can be significantly different to that. So, you know, you need to factor in things like, you know, any of your agency fees, and that could be us or any of the other organizations, and our fees do differ, so it's worth factoring that in. Also, you know, as Sarah said, you've got the clinic fees, and that's Embryo Creation, as well as the transfers, and having a budget for more than one transfer is probably quite important. As Tracy said right at the beginning, you know, her first set of IPs had multiple embryo transfers, and sadly they were not successful. Michael had a very different journey, and that it all happened like clockwork. So factoring in multiple transfers and any fees associated with the clinic is going to be important. There's also any legal fees that you might want to, you know, if you wanted a lawyer who was going to run your parental order for you, then there would be legal fees around that post-birth. But a lot of people in the UK, you know, will run that process themselves. So again, that's a bit of a pick and mix. There's also your surrogate expenses, which typically, you know, we see between 12 and 20,000 for a successful surrogacy journey. So again, you may have costs where you're, you know, incurring some of her expenses while she's trying to get pregnant. And then, you know, things like travel and accommodation, you know, this theme of trust, which is so fundamentally important, and, you know, getting together is really important. And, you know, outside of COVID, you know, people want to meet up straight away to have that click and that bond. So if your surrogate, you know, is 20 miles down the road, well, you can probably meet up for a cup of coffee. If she's 500 miles away, it's a mission, and you've got to factor in not just your time, but the cost of getting there, plus, you know, staying over, and the number of times you want to be able to do that, not just conception, but, you know, during the pregnancy, so that you're available. So broad brush, we've said, you know, between 50 and 60, but again, it can happen for a lot less as well. Have I missed anything on that? Everybody else? No? Good. Okay. Okay, I think I've hopefully answered the question, costs apart from surrogacy. There's one more question in association, which was surrogacy. If you've got frozen embryos, how long is it start to finish? And again, sadly, that's a really tricky question. If everything, I don't know, Michael, it might be helpful to talk about your timelines from meeting Anna to Rupert being born.
we met Anna in January. We kind of decided that we wanted to do it together. We all decided 2 or 3 weeks later. We had to wait about 2 or 3 months for the embryos, which was unfortunate because we'd already made the decision. And as you mentioned earlier, often the surrogates, having gone through the screening process, are really eager to go. So we got the embryos in May. The embryo transfer happened within about 3 weeks. And as I said, our first transfer was successful. So Rupert was born in the April. So basically, just over a year.
Yeah, so pretty quick.
Yeah.
And Tracy, I mean, you've had 2 journeys, so very different.
Yeah, my second journey, we met in the December, and I gave birth in February 2018, so it would have been June. So yeah, met in the December, and we were in treatment sort of May time with transfer in June.
Yeah. And then your first journey, although it was unsuccessful, that was a couple of years in the process, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was 4 cycles. So getting things ready and everything in place. So a little bit longer with that one.
So again, it's you know, there are things that, you know, you can't shortcut, you know, getting to know your surrogate, putting together an agreement, plus then the clinical side of things, and you know, apart from the actual pregnancy, there's not much else that you can pin down to a certain amount of time. Okay. Tracy, just as we've got you here, how long does the surrogacy screening process take on average?
It's a bit of a tricky one to answer because it does depend on a lot of outside people being involved as well. So we have the different screenings. So I mean, initially we're sort of, the doctors have got to fill out the doctor's forms. I mean, that again, depending on the surgeries, takes different. Some can turn that around quite quickly, and other times it can take a little while. Then we surrogate goes to speak to our counsellor, and then going through the psych evaluation and things. So it's a little bit tricky because it does depend on how it's individual for each sort of surrogate, really. Also, we tend to take things you know, at a time scale for that surrogate as well. I mean, if you've got someone that's completely you know, really keen, wants to get everything back and gets things back to us, it can go quite quickly. But then if someone is taking a little bit longer about things, wants to think things through, and you know, sort of, it will be different. I'd say generally about 4 to 6 months.
I don't think we've ever seen anything faster than 4, have we?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Parental order costs, Natalie. Can you give us an idea of what the cost would be for legal fees for the parental order?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with parents in kind of various different ways with the parental order. So there's a court fee, which is £215, which you can't escape no matter how you do it. But really over and above that, it's a question of how much support you feel you need. So we have a basic service where we help parents with putting together their evidence. So we'll draft the statement and give you some kind of guidance on the process and how to run it yourselves. And the key bit there is kind of making sure that evidence and statement is drafted really well. And we charge £2,000 plus VAT for that service. If you would like us to manage the whole process for you from start to finish, then we charge a fixed fee of £6,000 plus VAT. And with that, what we do is just make sure that we kind of take the burden off of the process off your hands completely. So you're basically handing it over to us. And we will run it and we'll make sure it goes kind of as quickly and efficiently as possible. So we often find that the applications where we're representing parents, we're getting through in about three or 4 months. Whereas, you know, if you're doing it yourself, it'll take sort of 6 to 9 months typically.
Brilliant. Okay. And okay, so yeah, that was second question, was how long will it take for the parental order? So that's great. So question maybe for you as well as potentially Tracy. So if the parents aren't legal parents at birth, who does the baby go home with?
Did you take the baby home, Tracy?
I've got enough.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the intended parents would be typically present at the birth, and they would take their baby home. It's their baby, so the fact that the law hasn't quite caught up with that doesn't mean that that's not the reality on the ground, and that's what happens and what everybody expects.
Yeah, and a lot of hospitals now have surrogacy policies, and if they don't, they're kind of looking into it. So there's, you know, so when you're putting together your birth plan, then you'll work with the hospital to help them to understand what you all need as a surrogacy team, as opposed to you know, any other kind of delivery, and you know, making sure that actually when baby goes home, that the intended parents get the sleepless nights and the surrogate gets the pampering. So, not right. Okay, so new changes in the law. Is there anything in the offing, Natalie, in terms of the law?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been campaigning to have better law for surrogacy for many, many years, and for many years it felt a bit like banging our heads against a brick wall. But I'm really pleased to say there is some progress. So the Law Commission, which is the independent statutory body which reviews laws in the UK to make sure that they're modern and up to date, is currently midway through a 3-year project to review the law on surrogacy. So they have already made some very positive provisional recommendations. They had a public consultation on those recommendations last summer, and we're now waiting for their final report. So the final report is expected in early 2022. And what they will do is produce a piece of draft legislation that is a kind of neatly packaged up, ready for the government to send to Parliament. So hopefully it will be very persuasive, and the government will then send it to Parliament, so we will have new law. So it will be a little way away, but what they're recommending at the moment is that there'll be a new pathway for surrogacy, so that if you go through certain sensible steps at the outset, so working with a regulated organisation, putting things in writing, getting legal advice, having counselling, and going through screening, then you will be able to have a recognised surrogacy arrangement, so that when the baby is born, the intended parents will be the legal parents immediately. So that's really, really positive. And, you know, for us at Brilliant Beginnings, it works beautifully because all of these preconception steps are exactly what we do already. So, you know, even over and above the requirements that are looking like they'll come in. So we're very well set up to be able to kind of help parents through that pathway once it does become law, with a bit of luck and fingers crossed. But I'm not going to miss this opportunity to say, please write to your MPs, tell them about that this is happening, because we are going to need their support when this does go to Parliament. So we've been trying to build up relationships with people in Parliament so that we can kind of make sure that the right decision is made when the time comes. So we need as much help as we can get. So please do write to your MPs, tell them about your situation, get them on board. We're more than happy to talk to anybody. We've got parliamentary briefing documents and all kinds of things that we can send. So yes, that's my little piece of homework. Please go and do that.
Thank you. And one last question. I'll give everyone a moment if there's any last other questions to pop up in the chat box. But Natalie, one last question. You know, how often is there a problem in lieu of these law changes? How often is there a problem in terms of getting legal parenthood?
Yeah, so I'm very pleased to say that we have never lost a case, and that may sound a bit smug, but I think actually it just reflects the fact that, you know, the law is not there to assess whether parents are suitable, other than in a very, very light touch way. So the presumption when you make an application for a parental order is that you are already your child's legal parents, and the court understands that. So they're not assessing you in the same way that they would be if they were placing a child for adoption. So it's not a process to be kind of scared of. There's not really a question over whether you'll get the parental order or not. It's just a question of whether you meet the criteria and having to go through the process. So that there is, you know, almost no risk of the parental order not being granted.
Wonderful. Well, we'll end on that high note. And I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers tonight. As I said, we will be circulating the recording, so you can listen again or you can send it on. In the meantime, there are pots and pots of information on the Brilliant Beginnings website. And watch this space. We're hoping to relaunch in the very near future. There is lots of information on the NGA law website, as well as on the Herts and Essex website. So do feel free to look there. We're also very happy to talk to anyone individually if you want some of our help, either understanding, what are the implications. And oh, sorry, I've just seen one more question right at the end here. Oh, in fact, I've missed one as well. Apologies before I wrap up. But there's loads of information on our website. There's also services that we offer in relation to helping people navigate through the various destinations and helping you understand, what you need to budget for, what the practicalities are, how do you find a surrogate in whatever destination, including the UK, and all the things to help you map out whether surrogacy is firstly the right thing for you, but secondly, where is it going to be possible for you to complete your family. And similarly, Tracy is available to any surrogate. Doesn't need to be a Brilliant Beginnings surrogate. We want to make sure that people have the right information before they're thinking about this. So before we wrap up, there's a question, Natalie, about the Ukraine. In relation to the issues that we're hearing about in the news, and are you able to kind of comment on some of that?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I'm conscious this is about kind of UK surrogacy, but just kind of very briefly, we obviously with all the travel restrictions that are now happening for parents who are going overseas for surrogacy, it's creating some really difficult challenges. So first of all, kind of getting into the country where their child will be born if that country has closed its borders, like the Ukraine, and then secondly, being able to get emergency travel documents to get the child out again and home. So we've been working with the government and with parents in, trying to get to lots of different surrogacy destinations. And there was a kind of news story about the Ukraine that blew up over the weekend because one of the agencies there had released some footage, heartbreaking footage of 50 babies all kind of lined up in a row whose parents can't get there to care for them, and the agency is looking after them in a hotel, which is, just very, very difficult to see. So, I mean, the good news is that the British government is well aware of these issues and they are doing what they can. So it's possible to get permission to get into the Ukraine. You have to go through the British Embassy and you have to get the timing of your application just right. So it's really important that kind of there's good planning. And then once the baby's born, the Home Office is being really helpful with expediting applications for British passports. So we're getting children home quite quickly. So there are solutions. And I think a lot of those kind of stranded 50 babies were children of parents from other countries, which are not being so supportive. But obviously, no one when they started out on these surrogacy journeys expected that the world would close down when their children were born. So it's a very difficult situation for everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you, Natalie. One last question, which is actually for Sarah. And if someone has embryos at a clinic in London, can a surrogate from outside the UK come to the UK? I think that's what that's saying. Come into the UK to use those embryos.
I think largely that would depend on where she came from, but I think generally the recommendation would be to transfer the embryos rather than the surrogate. I think, I mean, Natalie probably may know the answer to this more than me. It's not a situation I've encountered. I think we would look at it very cautiously and want lots of legal backup before entering something like that. But I think it probably would depend largely on the country that the surrogate was coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it does depend. There may be immigration issues with the surrogate being able to travel to the UK for the purposes of fertility treatment, but it will depend on which country they're coming from.
And of course, the other alternative is to export the embryos to that company, and depending on what country that is, Different countries will have different rules around that. I know transferring embryos to the US, there is a Food and Drug Administration waiver visa that has to be applied for before the embryos can be imported into the States. So that needs to be negotiated between the clinics. There are other destinations where it can happen. So yes, I guess the advice is you need to check it out from both sides, not from the embryo, but from an immigration perspective as well. Wonderful. Well, thank you ever so much. Thank you to Sarah at Herts and Essex, and to Natalie at NGA Law, and very importantly, Michael, for giving up your time with the kids, and Tracy, your very large home life. I'm going to leave you all here. I'm going to be around for a little while just in case there are any other questions, but I'll leave the rest of you to enjoy the sunshine this evening, and please stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.